Well, joining us on this edition of the News Review, we have our correspondent, Said Purazos, joining us from the British capital, London. Also, we have political commentator Frank Emspak joining us from Madison. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Said in London. Said, talk to us about the events that have led now to the extradition of Julian Assange.
Well, it's been 10 years in the making, Bardia, when Julian Assange first published those diplomatic cables in Iraq and Afghanistan, war logs, after which he was accused of rape and sexual assault in Sweden, released on bail, flew to the UK, sought refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, was accused of breaching residency rules at the embassy, after which British police stormed the embassy and dragged him to the maximum security prison, Belmarsh, which is the UK version of Guantanamo Bay, the prison there run by the United States, and has spent a lot of time in solitary confinement and the rest at that prison up until today. Originally, a British court ruled that he could not be extradited to the United States, citing the risk of suicide. But today, that has changed. The Home Secretary announced this. Of course, this comes only 2 days after her plan to deport a number of asylum seekers to the eastern African country of Rwanda hit a snag. And now this huge development in the case of Julian Assange, really a moment feared by his perhaps legal team and all his supporters who have had his back all these years. But as we heard from his wife, Stella Morris, saying that you and the legal team and everybody else would spend every waking hour making sure that Julian Assange is released, citing the fact that he is a political prisoner being punished for doing his job as a publisher and a journalist, which is to publish material that showed alleged war crimes committed by American forces in Afghanistan and Iraq. And what you're also looking at is a case of the United Kingdom kowtowing to the United States. What is going to happen from now on? They have a difficult 2 week ahead of them, Mr. Assange's legal team, to appeal this decision and at the High Court in the UK. And if not, ultimately they will be able to take the case up to the UK Supreme Court. But if an appeal is rejected, is turned down, then Julian Assange will be extradited to the United States within 28 days, where he is facing up to 175 years in prison, which is an eventuality that really everybody that has been supporting Mr. Assange tried really hard to avoid. But here we are now, and we're going to have to wait and see what will transpire in the next 2 weeks, Mario.
All right, Frank Emspak in Madison. The British government has decided that Julian Assange can be extradited to the United States. WikiLeaks says that this case is politically motivated. Julian Assange's lawyer has said that this is a grave threat to freedom of speech and journalism. What's your assessment of this ruling by the British government?
Well, I think it's a disaster all the way around. From my point of view here in the United States, this charging of Julian Assange, the charge is espionage. Now, he didn't break into anything. He didn't steal anything. He simply published something. But we here have to deal with the fact that during the Vietnam War, Daniel Ellsberg published the papers, right? This major issue, right? And he actually, as a security advisor, was able to acquire these papers, stole them essentially, published them. The American government tried to stop it. The New York Times and others sued on the basis of the First Amendment. They published the Pentagon Papers. It was a major thing. It was exactly the same idea. In the Pentagon Papers, And it was very clear that the entire basis of the war against Vietnam was a fake, and that we were doing things in violation of the American Constitution, in secret from the American people, and so forth. The same type of thing. Now, Ellsberg was not charged ultimately with espionage. And ultimately, the courts agreed that he did the right thing in the sense that he did not violate the espionage laws or things like that. In fact, was acting as a responsible, sort of whistleblower. Well, this Assange business, where the United States has been very, very clear now for 10 years that they want this guy, then it is a danger to the free press in Britain, maybe, but it's an absolute danger to the free press in the United States. What Julian Assange did and what WikiLeaks did was what a free press should do. And if the fact of the matter is, if he is charged and convicted of espionage, there isn't going to be very many reporters here who are going to risk that whenever they want to uncover a story or do some whistleblowing. And it'll be a further undermining of our free press here.
All right, stay with us, gentlemen, as we're going to take a look at some online reactions to this development. Our first reaction, John Pilger says, Home Secretary Priti Patel has approved the extradition of Julian Assange to an American hellhole. A new appeal will now challenge the political rottenness of British justice. Either we raise our voices as never before, or our silence colludes in the death of a heroic man. Richard Bergen writes, disgraceful decision by Priti Patel to approve the extradition of Julian Assange to the USA. There he faces the rest of his life in prison for his journalistic work exposing war crimes in U.S.-led wars on Afghanistan and Iraq. This decision strikes a blow to press freedom. Next, user Bean writes, Julian Assange's case is so important because we've lost journalism. We've lost the ability to find the truth. The decision from the UK Home Secretary to approve Assange's extradition shows the UK agrees with the US that real journalism should be criminalized. Center for Investigative Journalism writes, Priti Patel approves Julian Assange's extradition to the United States for publishing information about war crimes in the public interest. An era-defining disastrous decision for press freedom in the UK and a dark day for journalists everywhere. The fight must go on. And our last reaction, Serena writes, Priti Patel made the right decision to approve the extradition of Julian Assange to the United States for the appropriate punishment. Assange is a traitor and deserves a long prison sentence. Let's go back to our guest, Said in London. Said, we spoke to you earlier about this issue, and you mentioned that we might be seeing demonstrations in opposition of this ruling, protests maybe. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it's quite predictable that when an announcement like that is made, a lot of public support is needed to help the legal team and the people who are making sure that Mr. Assange is not extradited to the United States to provide that kind of support. And some of the groups that will be involved in doing so, for example, would be the Stop the War Coalition, who have already staged demonstrations, massive ones over the past few years in support of Mr. Assange. So my expectation is that in the coming days and weeks, specifically in the next 2 weeks, while they have time to appeal this decision, we're going to see protests being held in London in support of Mr. Assange, and obviously in opposition to this decision by the Interior Ministry or the Home Office led by Priti Patel. So it's just a matter of time for those things to happen. But again, earlier on, I listened to one of the tweets that you just read about Mr. Assange having published those documents in the public interest. The argument that the American government has is that those were classified documents that have potentially endangered lives, and so the publication was not in the public interest. Whereas the answer to it by everybody across the board, supporters of Mr. Assange, has been that if governments are committing human rights abuses or war crimes around the world, the public have the right to know. And what Julian Assange did was he published those documents that were provided to him via WikiLeaks.
And our last question to Mr. Emspak, I'd like to get your thoughts on the same issue as well. One of the reactions we read in our social media segment said that Julian Assange published this information about the war crimes in public interest. Can you break that down for us and how you view it?
Well, if we're having supposed to be a democracy here where the population, the people can make informed decisions, you have to have the information. And if things are being done in secret and then classified, and then you're arrested for exposing them, we don't have a functioning system, a functioning democratic system. What is going to happen over the next couple of weeks, the hypocrisy of many of the people who are supposedly advocates of a free press is also going to come out. We haven't heard from the various societies for the protection of journalists, which are very, very eager to criticize other countries in the world about journalistic issues, particularly the ex-Soviet Union and Eastern Europe and various other countries. We haven't heard a peep from them, at least today, and I don't suspect we will. Likewise, the major human rights organizations have a stake in this, and we need to hear from them, because what we're talking about here, in terms of the stuff that was in WikiLeaks, is crimes against humanity, is the improper treatment of prisoners, of civilians, and so forth, the things that Amnesty International and other organizations have been so clear about in certain places. So to me, this is a challenge across the board for those who support or who say they support freedom of press and freedom of information. This is not just the Julian Assange issue. This is much, much greater in terms of the implications here in the United States.
All right, thanks a lot, gentlemen. Press TV side putters are joining us from the British capital, London, and political commentator Frank Emspak joining us from Madison. With that, it brings us to an end here on this edition of the News Review, but do stay tuned. There's plenty more to come here on Press TV. See you soon.